So hey, I sent out a text to most of you yesterday saying I was going to go through and do this video, and just like assumability, assumptions on VA loans, I got a lot of feedback. A lot of people want to know how to do that in this past year, and then this obviously with the new rule changes and stuff on the real estate side on how commission can go through and be paid on the buyer side agent. We've got tremendous feedback of people asking questions. How is this going to be affected on VA loan? What's absolutely going to go through and happen when this rule goes into place? And I want to kind of lay it out a few things, just kind of what VA is going through and saying, what the industry's looking at from our side. And I also want to give you a little sense of lower the panic level. I mean, this is no different in our industry, what we went through in 2011, especially in 2016. We received money through multiple different layers. And we got money through yield spread premium, stuff was paid on the back end. You're basically paid from different side that was hidden from the client. And what this rule and what this law is going to do is just create transparency. It's going to establish basically that, yes, you're paid as an agent and here's what it is. And it's going to be less confusing for the consumer to go through. So ultimately in the end, this is a good thing. But you just got to be positive through this because yes, when this comes out, there's going to be a lot of people in our industry that are just real estate agents that are not going to be able to go through and do it. They can't go through and deal with anything on it. But here's the basic conclusion from the VA. There's two things basically that are limited now. There'll be no more hidden fees. That's number one. That's basically established, and that's a positive thing. And then there is no more assumed that there's going to be 3% paid by the seller in concessions to go through and do. So that's not going to go through and happen. It's not going to be there anymore. But it's really the same. I mean, this is going to be that agent that's not going to be able to say that they're worth it to go through and explain that, or what's going to go through and happen, are going to have a hard time going through and labeling it. But everything I can go through and see, it's not going to be something that the veteran themselves or anything else is going to come up with those proceeds to go through and pay for it. It's going to be consumed into the transaction. It's going to be negotiated into the transaction. And a lot of people say, oh, you can't go through and do that. Yes, you can. It's a common occurrence, basically a fee. So the way the VA looks at it, it's an IPC. It's an interested parties contribution basically to the transaction. So it's also common and customary in our industry that there's 5.5% to 7% within fee structures involved in transactions. So it's still going to basically be netted in there. It's still going to be concluded that that's going to go through and take place. Now we've seen in some other markets where agents have gone in and listed saying, no, we're just not going to pay a seller's fee or anything's going to go through and do it. They're labeling that their hard stance. They're going to go through and do it. Houses aren't selling. I've seen that go through, and I know of 4 occasions, and all 4 occasions, yes, they were an upper-ended type transactions, but all 4 ended up being negotiated factor fee that they paid for the real estate commission to go through and do it. So other conclusions, podcasts, everything else, go through and look at the industry as a whole. Going back to us, the fear factor in our industry was saying, oh my gosh, we're making between 1.5 to 3 points on every transaction. We're only charging the customer 1%, and then we're making all this money in the back end. That when this happens to us, we're going to make a lot less money. No, we just went into it and said, you're making 2.5. It's set at that fee. That's what the structure was, and we didn't do any less transactions by going through and showing that number, circling it, and saying the compensation is basically coming from outside parties are going through and paying it. But this is what we're receiving on a transaction. In the end, we didn't do any less deals. Nothing else went through and changed. Now, a lot of people in that time period jumped to banks, jumped to institutions that thought they could still hide from it or go through and do things. And then the people that stayed in the channel that just figured out how to negotiate their way through it ended up being highly successful. So I think the same thing on the real estate side of things. But I thought this was a pretty good conclusion to go through and think about that. 98% of the people out there aren't going to care. But 2% are going to care. It's going to be a factor. We spend a lot of our energy and fear and everything else on that 2%. We think, oh, because they're going to go through and say, well, I only want to pay 1.5, or I don't want to pay anything, or whatever's going to go through and happen. But the energy and effort is such a small amount. You're worth what you're worth. I go through and do a transaction. If I'm making 2.5, I circle it. I'm worth 2.5. I'm going to work to achieve that. If you feel you're worth 3, put 3, and that's what you're working for, and you're going to negotiate that in the transaction. But it's not something that's going to be, haggled on every single time to go through and do it. It's going to be customary still in the same industry that there will be companies that come out and try to do it for less, but it is what it is. Look what's happened every time when someone's tried to do a 1%, commission sale in real estate. It's happened here in the Valley over and over and over again. Those companies don't go through and survive. real estate will continue to move on, just like it has in the past. I thought a great conclusion to go through and kind of end this note on. Been doing VA for a long time. You know, I've told you, most of you guys all heard, I've done over 7,000 VA transactions. I've been in this industry now 28 plus years. And in that time, there's a thing called a VA funding fee that's added on top of every single transaction. You have the right as a veteran to pay that on your own or finance it into the transaction. And in my entire career of doing this, I've had two people. One was the seller that paid for it on behalf of the borrower, and one was the borrower decided to go through and pay for it. When the option is to finance something into a transaction, or it's customary that it's financed into it, that's what everyone goes through and chooses to do. We all do it when we buy a car and they'll include our taxes or whatever into the transaction. It's financeable. We put it into the transaction. It's not any different than what we're getting ready to go through. It's just a different way we have to go through and think about it. And winners win. I mean, I love that statement when people go through and do it. If you believe you're going to win through this, you'll go through and win to be able to get through it. So please reach out to me in any other questions on VA. We're here for you all the time here in the Valley, being the local connection. I'll try to give you more feedback, but really truthfully, per VA, they're not worried about any of this stuff. It's not really going to change anything on their end. I know people are saying VA can't pay more than a certain percentage or this and that. It's customary fee. So it's not something that's really going to be taken care of. And you're not going to find an FHA VA, or I don't think you're going to find a conventional person that's going to walk in and pay 3%. It's not going to happen. That's not the way this thing's going to work out in the end. So hope that makes sense. Love feedback. If you guys have any other conclusions on this, please reach out to me. I love individual conversations. And as anything, I get anything new and information, I'll make sure to pass that on to you, especially per VA. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the week. Talk to you later. Thanks.